As much as I like retro gaming, sometimes the community makes me want to reach into my computer screen and headbutt various Reddit and Twitter users. If you just want to play retro games and you already own even a modest PC, all retro hardware released before the PSW 60 generation is absolutely not required. Anyone that wants to sit there and say,
games perform different on emulation compared to real hardware,
can just
shut the fuck up!
Here is Germac running on MAME, and here it is running on my real arcade machine. And do you know what the difference is?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
It's exactly the same fucking game, it plays exactly the same on both. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy looking at the artwork on old game boxes and looking through the old manuals, especially on the Japanese ones, but I can't stand retro gaming snobs who look down on emulation and try to convince other people that somehow they're not experiencing the same game. I'm going to take this a step further too. I've hooked up a Nintendo Famicom to my capture card to record real hardware so I can make this point. This is Super Mario using the standard AV lead, so no tricks involving scalers and image cleaners. Put it side by side with the Mesen emulator, and guess what? It's the same fucking game. But instead of using Mesen, I could use FCU, and then you get a slightly different colour palette, which you can tell by looking at the sky. And I think it looks more appealing than the original. That's right, I think the emulated version looks better than the real hardware. What you gonna do about it? I actually recorded a few games like Fantasy Zone, which just looks horrendous. You get all these bollocks at the bottom, whereas on the emulator, much nicer to look at. Now I'll probably piss a load of people off, so I'll say it again. I like using original hardware. I like having the controller that the game was meant to be played with, and I like looking at the artwork plastered all over cartridges, cases and manuals. Even though sometimes that means you look at a game's case and the artwork makes it look like it's going to take you off to some fantasy wonderland, but then you put the cartridge in and it looks like a piece of shit. No, what I hate is people that play retro games but then shit all over other people that play the same games but using an emulator. Because you know what? If someone wants to play Golden Axe Warrior on the Sega Master System, they should be able to do that without feeling they have to pay out the arse for it.
Strong stuff, but he's right.
But there are other reasons why people should completely ignore retro game collectors. For example, what is the mindset of someone pays £500 for one of the most common PS2 games ever made? For that price, in the middle of summer, you could fly from London to Madrid for a weekend break and still have spending money. So flight, hotel, spending money, or a commoner ship PS2 game in a clear plastic shell. But you know what makes this even more ridiculous? It's the fucking PAL version. PAL TVs have slower displays than American and Japanese NTSC TVs, so all European games used to run slower than American or Japanese imports. Okay, listen, if you really want a proper copy of Guardian Heroes on the Sega Saturn, I get it, it's fine, I'm not going to fight you on that. But why the fucking hell are people paying out £500 for the GIMP PAL version when they could get the full speed Japanese version that comes with the full colour manual for only 50 quid? I mean, you'd have to be a fucking mong. £1,000 for Resident Evil 3 on the PS1. £1,000 for the PAL version.
What's wrong with you?
And these are not just eBay chancers trying to scam people into buying a load of shit. These are actual sold auctions. So the next time you do something stupid, don't worry about it, because somewhere, some utter spasmod laid out £450 for fucking Echo Jr. on the Mega Drive. Now earlier in this video, I mentioned that when I was recording the Famicom footage, I just did it in the most basic way. So that is a basic boys AV to HDMI converter, then HDMI straight into my Elgato capture card. To be fair, this isn't a million miles away from the dodgy old RF imagery we had to deal with back in the 80s, which smeared and bled our games across crusty old TVs. But I see these people that are so dedicated to using retro hardware, they spend hundreds of pounds on devices like the RetroTink to clean up and scale the picture to run on an LCD flat panel HD TV. And guess what the end result looks like? That's right, It looks like emulation. What's the point? Why? Why spend all this money on retro hardware, original games and expensive conditioners to end up with a result that plays and looks no different to PC emulation? Why? If you're that sort of person that does this, it's not like you have friends you can attempt to impress with this, is it? I just don't get it. If you're so obsessed with having the real experience that you're willing to spend all that money on a real console, real cartridges and a RetroTink, then why not just fuck the RetroTink off and use that money to buy a CRT screen? Because this is the only part of the entire setup that makes any actual measurable difference. A CRT screen will display retro games differently to a modern flat panel. Anyone can see it. It's obvious which screen type the art in retro games was designed to run on. I have an old PC monitor which I used to run emulators on, and that produces a far more faithful looking retro experience than real hardware running on an LCD TV. But to circle back to the overall main point of this video, if you want to get into retro gaming, don't feel that using emulation is going to provide some sort of lesser experience than the real console. As someone who played these games back in the 80s and 90s, emulation does the job perfectly, so don't let any gatekeeping retro gaming snob tell you otherwise.
ビデオにコメントを残して、いいねボタンを押し、友達に勧めてから、ドッジケバブを購読してください。